Mr. Bennett, I am going to
Yes.
go to you next. I want to hear, thank you so much. You have volunteered your time for many, many weeks here, free of charge. And with your past experience, it was great to have you step up to the plate and offer to be our Senate liaison, particularly since we were still in session and we could not be there. Because of your expertise as being a past Secretary of State of Arizona and a Senate President prior to me, I would like to get your take, and we would like to know what happened when the ballots arrived, what was the process you observed, and help us walk through that stage. So I'm turning it over to you at this point.
Okay. And I should start probably by thanking others who have assisted me in the liaison process. Julie Fisher, Randy Pullen, John Brakey, Brandon Slayton, and probably others have been a tremendous help in overseeing this process and interfacing between the Senate and the audit. So I'll speak primarily to the chain of custody. We received the ballots and the equipment on 2 days, April 21st and April 22nd of this year. The equipment arrived mostly on the 21st, and I think there were a couple pallets that came with the ballots on the 22nd. I want to give compliments to Maricopa County. They were very professional in the transfer of the chain of custody from them to us. Co-elections Director Scott Jarrett was very professional, along with several of his staff that helped in that process. We received 1,691 boxes of mostly ballots, but other items. And with Mr. Jarrett and his staff's help, we worked through every one of those and checked every box. We worked through some minor discrepancies that we resolved. There were 26 mismarked boxes. There were 8 boxes present on the ballots that were not on the manifest. There were a couple boxes on manifests that were not present. I think there were 3 boxes that were on different ballot numbers than the manifest indicated they were, but we located them on other ballots. Of those 1,691 boxes, they arrived on 46 pallets. 2 of the boxes were data cards, hard drives, fobs, other things that we transferred over to Ben Cotton's group for the data analysis. In the process of doing the audit, some personally identifying information was discovered in 2 boxes, kind of stuffed in with the ballots. I think it's the kind of the practice of a county as large as Maricopa, where you have multiple, thousands of boxes. They have to make sure that those boxes are filled to the brim, so that if that box ends up on the bottom row of a pallet and there's 4 stacked on top of each other, that they can hold the weight. So they kind of build bricks, as one of my assistants kind of calls it, where you make sure that the boxes are full. And in a couple of the boxes we found a variety of counter slips, I think was the first box that we ran into. And the auditors took great care in making sure that no personally identifiable information was compromised. So we took personally identifiable information out of 2 boxes and segregated those in their own 2 boxes. We found personally identifiable information in the spoiled ballot boxes, and that ended up creating 16 new boxes of PII, as we called it. In 2 of the Braille ballot boxes, we found UOCAVA ballots and even some other ballots. I think Doug might talk to that in a little more detail as to the number of those. But so we separated those, and that created 2 more boxes. And then eventually, Cipher, after going through the equipment, returned the 2 data boxes that they had. So we went from 1,691 boxes at the beginning to now we have 1,711 boxes on 47 pallets. As far as the equipment, we received the 9 high-volume scanner machines, 4 called High Pros and 5 Canons. 20 adjudication stations, 4 EMS workstations, and the EMS server, along with some other miscellaneous equipment. That was on 16 pallets. Again, we received that on April 21st. Every pallet and every box on the pallet was co-signed by Mr. Jarrett and myself, as were the 1,691 boxes that I mentioned earlier. We also received 385 precinct tabulators. Those were on 24 pallets, well, not pallets, I guess you would call them racks or rolling carts. And so we identified each and every one of those by serial number. The 9 high-volume machines, adjudication station, the 20 adjudication stations, the 4 EMS workstations, and the EMS server. Mr. Cotton's company collected the forensic data off those, and he'll speak to how they did that to make sure that none
Mr.
of
Bennet, if I could just interject, could you tell everybody what EMS
I'm sorry.
stands
EMS is the election management system.
for? Okay, thank you.
Ben will speak to how they collected that data using equipment that could read only and do no damage to the original evidence that the copies were made from. But the high volume machines, the adjudication stations, the election management system workstations and servers were returned to the county on April 30th. So we had the equipment about 9 days, or at least those pieces of equipment. We would have returned the other 385 precinct tabulators, but I think Ben will speak to that as well. We still do have the precinct tabulators. Both the equipment and the ballots were in locked cages during the entire time that we have possessed the ballots and equipment with limited access. I think most of the time there are probably maybe 2 people that had keys to the ballot corrals, we call them.
Armed security outside every time.
Yeah, we also had 24-hour guarded armed security, both inside and outside of the building. We had 24/7 live stream on the ballots and the equipment during the entire time that they've been in our possession. Doug spoke earlier that that's a very significant part of the 2 petabytes or whatever you said was of data that we have collected. While we have had the machines and the ballots in our custody, we have continuous and complete chain of custody on every box and every machine. Even and especially during the time when we had to move over to the Wesley Bolin building and store the ballots and machines while the Coliseum was used for the high school graduations, the return back to the Coliseum, and now we're back at the Wesley Bolin. But during all that process, we have had continuous and complete chain of custody while everything has been in our possession. It was shown on the video that every time a box moved somewhere on the floor, it was signed out by somebody in the corral to somebody who took it to a table. It was received at that table by signature. So every time a box moved, 2 people signed for it, and then the reverse when it was returned. And just kind of for your information, when we returned these boxes, most of what we received were boxes sealed with regular packing tape. I think there were 52 boxes that were used in the hand count audit by Maricopa County that were sealed with tamper-evident tape, but the other 1,600 and some odd boxes were just sealed with regular packing tape. It's our intent and commitment that when we return everything to Maricopa County, that we will reseal the boxes. And as the video stated, we've gone to great lengths to make sure that the same ballots that were in the boxes when we received them are in the same boxes when we return them. And I think in the same order that we found them. When we close these boxes in the next few weeks and return them to Maricopa County, we will do so with tamper-evident tape to seal the boxes, and then a numbered seal across the top opening that will be recorded with each box, so that there's a tamper-evident tape and a numbered seal that will be on every box that we return. And I think that speaks primarily to the chain of custody At some point when we talk about things that maybe we ought to be considering as far as statutory changes or improvements, I can talk about some of the things that the Election Procedures Manual of the State of Arizona and our state statutes require as far as the storage and security of ballots.
Can we go ahead and do that
wanna do
now,
some of that?
since we're on
Okay.
the subject of chain of custody and storage?
Well, one of the things that we subpoenaed that has not been provided is the chain of custody that should have been created when ballots were received by Maricopa County and while they were going through the process of the election. If you go to Chapter 8, I think it's 5, Roman numeral 5, subsection E, storage and security of ballots, it reads that official ballots must be inventoried upon receipt and prior to distribution to voting locations. Item 2 is they must be accessed by election staff only to the extent necessary to perform their authorized task. A key one, though, is third, they must be stored in locked, secured location that prevents unauthorized access, as we have done. And in that number 3, it says they must be documented with a written log or with electronic keypad access that indicates the date, time, and identity of the person accessing the ballots. Fourth, must be witnessed by 2 or more election staff members of different political parties if possible when being moved or transferred, which includes an inventory of the ballots before and after the move or transfer. And then the last item is very important as well, since we use ballot-on-demand printers in many of the counties around Arizona, that the officer in charge of elections shall also implement reasonable security procedures for auditing and accountability of blank ballot stock for use with on-demand printers. So part of what we have been trying to get, in addition to the ballots themselves, is a chain of custody from the very beginning of the process when the county took ballot stock and or pre-printed ballots from their vendors, and a chain of custody ever since then, which is still forthcoming.
That was on the original subpoena, and
Yes.
we have not received it.
Madam President, just if I may, Mr. Bennett, what's been the response when you've asked for that? What did the county tell you?
They've provided us what they're going to provide us with.
Okay.
So are you saying they're refusing to give
Yeah.
us that information at this point?
Every time I've tried to interact with the folks at the elections department, I've been told that I need to deal with the county attorney's office, and most of that time I've received kind of the answer that we gave you everything we're going to give you.
Okay,
I'm trying not to be flippant, but
Yeah.
that's,
we appreciate that. Can you, as the past Secretary of State, I know you're familiar with the handling of ballots. I know that, a couple of months ago, Senator Peterson and I had our first update briefing, and there were some things mentioned about bags that are sealed at some point and apparently unsealed at some point. There were boxes that you opened and there were broken seals at the bottom. Could you explain, to the best of your ability, how are ballots supposed to be handled and treated from when they're at the voting centers or at the polling stations, and how, when you receive those ballots and you open those boxes, what did you find? Could you walk us through what we should be looking for?
well, in many of the boxes, we found pretty much a very little existence of any ballot batch sheets that would describe how many ballots should be found in their batches. Maricopa County processed the election in 10,341 batches. Most of their batches were right around 200, but they had 20-some batches that were 1 ballot per batch, and they had other batches of ballots, mostly from the voting centers, that were around 1,000 in a batch. Some of the boxes, you would see a batch number on the outside of the box, identifying it as election day, so it came from a polling location. And if there was just one number, then you would infer from that there's only one batch in there, and it was a large batch from a voting location. as ballots are processed at the voting locations, I think Maricopa had 171, I believe, voting centers. When those are processed, they're bagged and locked in sealed bags and sent down to the central counting location. They are opened again there, and when they are put in the boxes, we found some of the cut seals and things like that. So the fact that we found some cut seals was probably, it was easier to throw them in the bottom of the box than throw them in the trash can somewhere, and it doesn't speak to anything violative of state law or election procedures manual, but that apparently is the way that some of the people disposed of the seals that came from the bags at the voting centers. The ballots that are handled at the central count, which is the vast majority of the ballots in Maricopa County's situation, of the 2.1 million, or actually 2,089,563 ballots that were processed, approximately 1.9 million were processed through the mail and therefore at central count locations, and about 168,000 ballots were processed at the other, at the 171 polling locations. When those ballots are put in those boxes, in some cases we found pink sheets. We and they, Maricopa County, called them that would say below this pink sheet there should be 200 ballots, but 2 were taken to duplication, and so there should be 198. As was reported earlier, and I think Doug may speak to it again, there were some discrepancies, or quite a few discrepancies found, but it was later discovered that the county has blue sheets that are used at a different point in the process to identify a time in their process where ballots are again sent to duplication. And so the blue sheets explain that the pink sheets would go from 200 to -2 to 198. A blue sheet might get you from 198 to, we sent another 6 or 7 to duplication, so the number would change again. But
So, Madam President, if I may, Mr. Bennett, to that point, what, were you given the blue sheets? Have we been
No.
given the blue sheets?
we were not given the blue sheets by Maricopa County, but we were able to get the blue sheets through one of the assistant liaisons organizations, Audit USA out of Tucson, who requested by public records request the blue sheets,
Okay.
and then provided those to the audit, and I think they've been helpful. Doug may speak to that a little further as to explaining some of the discrepancies that are not entirely explained by the pink sheets that we sometimes found in the box. Sometimes we would open a box and all the pink sheets would be stuffed down the side vertically, and you really at that point had no idea of where you would insert those pink sheets in between batches of ballots to account for the sum of the ballots in the box. I think a lot of this may stem from standard procedure where we've not done many audits, and most counties have put things in boxes knowing that they're going to be sealed up, put on pallets, shrink wrapped, and put in a warehouse for 22 months and then destroyed. And usually nothing or nobody's ever being looked at or looking at them. In this case, I think we have discovered that we could probably use a little beefing up in our election procedures manual and or state statutes as to how things are documented and stored in an organized, consistent fashion in boxes in case other audits are done in the future. But there's no, I can find no election procedures manual directives or state law that says you have to put them in the boxes in this specific way, but that may be something that we need to look at.
Anything else that you want to add at this point? We'll have a
only other
chance to
thing,
come back with you if you do need.
Yeah, the only other thing I guess that I was personally involved in on a couple of, not the only other thing, but an other thing that I was called to one of the counting tables is when we started opening duplicate ballots. There was almost one whole pallet of ballots that were called original/damaged ballots sent to duplication. And then there was quite a few boxes, mostly on one pallet, but scattered amongst 3 or 4 other pallets where the duplicates were supposedly there for the duplicates that were sent to duplication. So if a ballot gets damaged and has to be sent to duplication, there is a very specific process in the Election Procedures Manual, Chapter 10, Roman numeral 2, Section 3, Procedures for Duplicating a Ballot. This stems precisely from ARS 16-621A, which says that they are to record an identical serial number on both the original and duplicate ballot, including spoiled duplicates. This ties the ballots together and creates a paper trail as required by the statute ARS 16-621A. We found, I would have to say, thousands of duplicate ballots where those serial numbers are not on them. And so it has created great difficulty to try to match up a duplicated ballot to its duplicate. And on thousands of the ones that a serial number was put on, they were put on by a, I guess you would call it like a dot matrix printer, very, very light. And unfortunately, they ended up being printed on the ballot on the top, usually top right part of the ballot, where the black square alignment marks are on the ballot. And so if a very light gray number is printed on little black boxes that are 1/4 of an inch apart, you see one number and you miss the next, and you see the number and you miss 2, and it made for some very difficult matching of duplicated ballots and their duplicates, which, as I just read to you, one of the most important things you need to do when you duplicate ballots is reflect a serial number on both the duplicate and the duplicated, so that you can do 2 main things. 1, make sure you have 1 for every one of the other, and 2, make sure that you can look at the votes reflected on the duplicated ballot and make sure that they reflected those correctly from the ballot that was damaged and was duplicated. So without those serial numbers, it gets very difficult. We found some nice bright red serial numbers on many, but some very difficult to deal with light black numbers on many others, and none whatsoever on many others.
If the corresponding numbers aren't on there, how would you know whether it was duplicated once or 10 times?
You wouldn't,
Okay, thank you.
unless you meticulously kept track of the total number in each group, which I think Doug's organization has done,
Okay.
to see if the totals match at least.
You said that when we return these ballots, I'm hoping that you guys and will help make sure that they are given to the Arizona County Treasurer. It's my understanding that...
Maricopa County Treasurer.
Right, the Maricopa County Treasurer. It's my understanding that our statutes say that they're supposed to be turned over to the treasurer at a certain point, and they were not. Are you well aware of that as well?
Yes.
Yes, okay. When we return those, you mentioned that you were going to put tamper evidence tape with a numbered seal on that.
Mm-hmm.
You also mentioned that everything you have done, you have put back in order.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned everything has been filmed with all of these petabytes of stuff. So if anybody opens those boxes, we will know that somebody has opened those boxes. And everything that you have just said, and if anybody needs to see that themselves upon court order or whatever, we will be able to not only view that on film, video, but we could also go to the physical evidence and break that seal, hopefully under court order, and go directly to exactly where you have said this has happened. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great, thank you.